The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Mercy's Bend, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of rust and amber. Deputy Marshal Eli McCrae stood outside the jailhouse, rolling a cigarette between calloused fingers as he watched tumbleweeds dance past the saloon. The air tasted of alkali dust and distant rain that would never reach this forgotten corner of Colorado territory. At 34, Eli had the lean, weathered look of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs. His badge caught the light as he turned, hearing the telegraph operator's boots pounding up the boardwalk. "Marshal McCrae!" Young Tommy Hartwell skidded to a stop, clutching a yellow paper. "Urgent wire from Fort Collins." Eli took the telegram, his gray eyes scanning the brief message. His jaw tightened. A survivor. A witness. Federal judge demanding immediate protection. The Coulter gang had struck again, this time leaving someone alive to tell the tale. "Ready, my horse," Eli told the boy, flicking his cigarette into the street. "And tell Sheriff Daniels I'll be gone a spell." Within the hour, Eli rode hard toward the Finch homestead, 15 miles through scrub pine and sandstone ridges. The telegram hadn't said much, just that a woman named Clara Finch had survived when Jack Coulter's boys had come calling for her family's water rights. Eli knew the type of devastation Coulter left behind. His own sister Mary had learned that lesson 6 years ago, her body left in a burned cabin for him to find. The Finch ranch appeared like a wound on the landscape. Smoke still rose from the barn skeleton, and buzzards circled overhead. 2 federal marshals stood guard near a buckboard wagon where a figure sat wrapped in a blanket despite the day's growing heat. "McCrae," Marshal Henderson nodded grimly. "She ain't said but 3 words since we found her. Doc says she's in shock." Eli approached the wagon slowly, the way he might approach a spooked mare. The woman didn't look up. Her hands, clutched around a tin cup, were steady but blood-stained. Auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders, tangled with bits of straw. When she finally raised her eyes to meet his, Eli felt something shift in his chest. Those eyes, green as spring grass, held a depth of horror that made his own grief seem shallow. "Mrs. Finch," he said quietly. "I'm Deputy McCrae. I'm here to keep you safe." She studied him for a long moment before speaking, her voice hoarse. "They'll come back." "Yes, ma'am. That's why we're leaving." Eli turned to Henderson. "I'm taking her to the old line cabin up on Covenant Ridge. Send word when the trial date's set." Henderson frowned. "That's rough country." "McCrae, snow's coming early this year. Rather face snow than Coulter's guns." Eli helped Clara down from the wagon, noting how she flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. "Can you ride, Mrs. Finch?" "I can manage." They set out as the sun reached its zenith, Eli leading on his bay gelding while Clara followed on a borrowed mare. He'd packed light, bedrolls, provisions for 2 weeks, ammunition, and his Winchester. The familiar weight of his Colt .45 rested against his hip. Behind them, Mercy's Bend shrank to a collection of matchstick buildings before disappearing entirely. The trail wound upward through stands of ponderosa pine, the air growing cooler with each mile. Eli kept watch on their back trail, but his attention kept drifting to the woman riding behind him. She sat straight in the saddle despite her obvious exhaustion, handling the mare with practiced ease, ranch bred. Then, that would help where they were going. By late afternoon, they'd climbed high enough to see patches of early snow clinging to north-facing slopes. The line cabin sat another hour's ride up a narrow canyon, built years ago by the cavalry for winter patrols. Eli had used it before when tracking fugitives, isolated, defensible, with a clear view of the approach, perfect for keeping someone hidden. "How much farther?" Clara's voice carried a note of strain. "Not far now." Eli pointed to a distant ridge, just beyond those rocks. She nodded, shifting in the saddle. For the first time, he noticed the dark stains on her dress, blood that wasn't her own. The telegram had mentioned her husband among the dead. How long had she hidden while Coulter's men did their work? What had she seen that made her valuable to the federal prosecutor? The cabin appeared as the sun touched the western peaks. a squat log structure with a stone chimney and single window. Eli dismounted, checking the interior before signaling Clara to follow. Inside, dust motes danced in the fading light. A rough table, 2 bunks built into opposite walls, a cast-iron stove, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. It wasn't much, but it would serve. "Home, sweet home," Eli said, trying for lightness. Clara stood in the doorway, surveying their refuge. "How long?" "Until they catch Coulter or hang him. Week, maybe 2. He began unloading the horses. "I'll take first watch tonight. You should rest." She moved past him to one of the bunks, sitting heavily. "I don't sleep anymore." Eli built a fire as darkness fell, the crackling flames throwing shadows across the small space. He heated beans and salt pork, setting a plate before Clara. She ate mechanically, her 1,000-yard stare fixed on something beyond the cabin walls. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked eventually. Her hand stilled on the tin plate. "Tomorrow, when the sun's up, darkness makes the remembering worse." He understood that. Some stories needed daylight to bear their weight. They finished the meal in silence, the only sounds the pop of burning pine and distant coyote song. Eli cleaned his Winchester while Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the fire. Near midnight, she finally lay down, fully clothed atop the bunk. Eli took position near the window, rifle across his knees. The moon had risen, painting the canyon silver white. Nothing moved in that ethereal landscape save wind-blown snow crystals. But Eli knew better than to trust the peace. Coulter had eyes everywhere, and a federal witness would bring top dollar to whoever delivered her. A sound made him turn. Clara, caught in some nightmare, whimpering like a wounded animal. He'd heard such sounds before, from soldiers after battle, from survivors of Indian raids, the mind's way of processing what shouldn't be processed. He fought the urge to wake her, knowing she needed whatever rest she could steal. Instead, he returned his gaze to the window and the cold stars beyond, somewhere out there. Jack Coulter was planning his next move. The man had avoided justice for 5 years, leaving a trail of dead homesteaders and burned dreams across the territory. But he'd made a mistake leaving Clara Finch alive. Eli just had to keep her that way long enough to see Coulter hang. The weight of memory pressed down. Mary's laugh, the way she'd tease him about his serious nature, her dreams of teaching school in Denver. All ended by men like Coulter. Men who took what they wanted and left others to clean up the ashes. His grip tightened on the rifle. This time would be different. This time, justice would have its say. Clara's breathing had steadied, the nightmare passing. Eli pulled his coat tighter against the cold, seeping through the logs, and settled in for the long watch. Dawn seemed a lifetime away, but he'd learned patience in harder schools than this. The woman sleeping across the room had survived hell. The least he could do was stand guard at the gates until morning came again. Dawn crept across the canyon walls like spilled honey, warming the frost-brittle air. Eli had dozed fitfully in his chair, jerking awake at every creak of settling wood. Clara stirred as the first rays touched her face, sitting up with the disoriented look of someone who'd forgotten where they were. Then memory returned, dulling her eyes. "Coffee's on," Eli said, gesturing to the pot warming on the stove. She rose stiffly, pouring herself a cup with hands that trembled only slightly. They ate biscuits and dried beef in companionable silence until Clara set down her cup with a deliberate care. "You want to know what happened?" "Not a question. Only what you're ready to tell. But the prosecutor will need details for the trial." Clara moved to the window, looking out at the pristine morning. They came at sunset. My husband Samuel was in the barn, tending a colicky mare. Papa had ridden over from his place to help. Her voice remained steady, almost detached. "I was putting supper on when I heard the horses." She paused, fingers tracing patterns in the window's condensation. 6 men, Jack Coulter leading, that silver concho belt catching the light. Samuel came out to meet them, peaceful-like. He never wore a gun on his own land. Eli waited, knowing the rhythm of terrible stories, how they came in waves, advancing and retreating. Coulter wanted the water rights, said we had a week to sign over or move on. Samuel told him we'd filed proper with the land office, that the water was ours, legal and clear. A bitter smile touched her lips. Legal don't mean much to men like Coulter. No, ma'am, it doesn't. They made Samuel kneel in the dirt. Coulter asked him again about signing over the rights. When Samuel refused, she stopped, knuckles white against the window frame. They made Papa watch while they worked him over, used rifle butts, boots. Samuel never cried out, not once. Just kept saying the land was mine, that I'd inherited it from my first husband, that he couldn't sign what wasn't his to give. The fire popped, making them both start. Clara continued, her voice dropping lower. That made Coulter curious about me. He sent 2 men to search the house while the others held Papa. I'd hidden in the root cellar. Samuel had made me promise. If trouble came, there's a false wall behind the potato bins. I could hear them tearing through our things, breaking what they didn't steal. She turned from the window, meeting Eli's gaze directly. They dragged Papa to the old oak, the one where Samuel had carved our initials when we married, made him dig with his bare hands, while Coulter told stories about other families who'd been foolish enough to resist, when the hole was deep enough. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her chin lifted. Someone needs to speak their names to the law. They put Papa in that hole standing up, packed the earth around him until only his head showed. Coulter lit a cigar, real casual, and asked Samuel one more time about those water rights. Eli had seen hardened men break down retelling easier stories, but Clara Finch stood straight-backed, bearing witness with a courage that humbled him. Samuel tried to crawl to Papa. Even broken as he was, they shot him in the back, left him reaching out, fingers still stretched toward... She shook her head sharply. Coulter told his men to let nature take its course with Papa, said the coyotes would find him soon enough. They burned the barn, shot our stock, and rode out laughing. How long did you stay hidden? Until near dawn. Until I was sure. Her composure finally cracked. Papa was gone by then. The cold, maybe, or his heart. I tried to dig him out, but the ground had frozen hard, and my hands... She looked at her palms, still bearing the evidence of her desperate excavation. Eli rose, moving to the shelf where he'd stored medical supplies. Let me see. She extended her hands reluctantly. The cuts had scabbed over, but several looked angry. Infected, maybe. He cleaned them gently with carbolic, wrapped them in clean bandages. Her hands were smaller than he'd expected, but calloused from real work. When he finished, she didn't pull away immediately. Why do you care? She asked suddenly. You don't know me. This is just another job for you. Eli released her hands, stepping back. 6 years ago, Jack Coulter's boys hit a cabin up near Willow Creek, killed a woman there, shot her for the crime of existing on land Coulter wanted. He turned to tend the fire unnecessarily. That woman was my sister Mary, 22 years old, planning to marry come spring. The silence stretched between them, filled with shared understanding. I'm sorry, Clara said finally. Don't be. Just help me put that bastard in the ground legal-like. She nodded slowly. What happens after, when the trial's done? That's up to you. Federal government might relocate you, new name and all. Or you could try to rebuild, though I wouldn't recommend it. Coulter has a long memory and loyal men. I have nowhere else to go. Samuel was from Ohio, but his family made it clear they never approved of him marrying a widow. And Papa was all I had left of blood kin. Eli heard the lost note in her voice, recognized it from his own dark nights. One day at a time. Mrs. Finch, that's all anybody can manage after something like this. She returned to the table, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. Would you call me Clara? Mrs. Finch was someone who had a home, a husband, a future planned out. I don't know who that woman was anymore. Clara, then... And I'm Eli. He settled across from her. Tell me about before. Sometimes it helps, remembering there was a before. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I wanted to be a nurse. Read every medical book I could beg or borrow. Papa thought it was foolish, women dreaming of such things. But my first husband, Thomas, he encouraged it. Said after we'd established the ranch, maybe I could study in Denver. The smile faded. Thomas died of pneumonia our second winter. I was 19, with land I couldn't work alone and debts I couldn't pay. So you married Samuel. He was kind, gentle, loved the land more than anything except maybe that colicky mare. Her voice caught. We were building something good. Eli, slow and steady, the way lasting things are built. Coulter took all that in one sunset. Outside, wind rattled the cabin walls, bringing the scent of coming snow. Eli added wood to the fire, aware of how small their shelter was against the vastness of the wilderness surrounding them. Two damaged souls thrown together by violence, bound by the thin hope of justice. I'll teach you to shoot, he said suddenly. If you're willing. Might make you feel less helpless. Clara studied him. You think they'll find us here? I think a woman who survived what you survived deserves to know she can defend herself. Whether it's Coulter's men or whatever comes after. She stood, moving with new purpose. When do we start? Now's as good a time as any. He retrieved his spare Colt from the saddlebags, checking the action. Ever handle a firearm before? Thomas showed me how to load and clean his rifle. Never had occasion to fire it. They stepped outside into the crisp morning. Eli set up targets, tin cans on a fallen log, then showed Clara how to hold the revolver, how to sight, how to squeeze rather than pull. Her first shots went wild, sending up puffs of dirt, but she listened carefully, adjusted her stance. Tried again. By noon, she was hitting more than she missed. There was something fierce in her concentration, a channeling of grief into purpose that Eli recognized. He'd done the same after Mary died, spending hours at target practice until his hands went numb, as if putting bullets through paper could somehow balance the cosmic scales. You're a quick study, he said as she reloaded without prompting. I have good motivation. She raised the Colt again, sighting down the barrel. Every time I close my eyes, I see Coulter's face, that smile as he lit his cigar. I want him to see me in that courtroom, want him to know someone survived to speak the truth. The gun barked 6 times in steady succession. 6 hits, the last can spinning off into the brush. Clara lowered the weapon, something like satisfaction flickering across her features. He'll see you, Eli promised. And then he'll hang. That's what justice looks like out here. Rough, maybe, but final. They returned to the cabin as afternoon shadows grew long. Clara helped prepare their simple meal, moving around the small space with growing familiarity. The awkwardness of the morning had eased into something approaching partnership. When she accidentally brushed against him reaching for the salt, neither of them flinched away. That night, as Eli took up his watch position, Clara spoke from her bunk. Thank you, for today, for treating me like I'm still whole. He didn't trust his voice to respond immediately. Finally, you are whole. Clara, bent maybe, scarred definitely, but not broken. Broken people don't learn to shoot straight as you did today. Her quiet laugh held a note of surprise. First time I've laughed since. Thank you for that too. Eli turned back to the window, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own griefs to navigate. But tonight, in this small shelter against the wilderness, 2 wounded souls had found a moment's peace. It wasn't much, but it was enough to build on, one day at a time. Just as he'd promised, the 3rd morning brought trouble with the dawn. Eli woke to the sound of horses picking their way up the canyon trail. 2 riders, moving slow and careful like men who didn't want to announce their presence. He touched Clara's shoulder, finger to his lips when her eyes snapped open. Company, he whispered. Stay low. She rolled from the bunk without question, reaching for the Colt he'd been teaching her to use. Pride flickered through him at her steady hands, the way she checked the cylinder before taking position by the back wall. 3 days in, and she was already thinking like a survivor. Eli eased to the window, Winchester ready. The riders had stopped just beyond effective rifle range, their faces hidden by hat brims and morning shadow. One raised a hand in greeting, or to show he was unarmed. Hard to tell which. "Hello, the cabin," the voice carried clearly in the still air. "Looking for Deputy McCrae." "State your business," Eli called back, not showing himself. "Ben Torres, from the Double Bar Ranch. Our boss sent us up here to trade for supplies. Didn't know the line cabin was occupied." Eli knew the Double Bar, legitimate outfit run by an old cavalry colonel. But Coulter could have men anywhere. Could have forced these cowboys to lead him here. "Right on, Torres. Cabin's closed for the season." The second rider shifted in his saddle. "Come on now, Deputy. We rode half the night. Just need some coffee and grain for the horses. We'll pay fair." "I said right on." The men exchanged looks. Torres tried again. "Look, Marshal, we don't want trouble, but there's snow coming heavy. And it's another day to the next shelter. Christian thing would be—" Eli's shot kicked up dirt inches from Torres' horse. The animal danced sideways, fighting the bit. "Next one won't miss. Clear out, now." Both riders wheeled their mounts, spurring hard back down the trail. Eli watched until they disappeared around the bend, then maintained his vigil another hour to ensure they didn't circle back. Only then did he lower the rifle. "You think they were lying?" Clara asked from her position. "Doesn't matter. Can't risk it." He moved to the stove, stoking the banked coals. "Coulter's got deep pockets. Could buy plenty of men to ask innocent questions, scout locations. Even if those boys were honest, they'll talk when they get back. Mention the unfriendly deputy holding the line cabin." Clara holstered the Colt, joining him by the stove. "Should we move?" "Not yet, but we'll need to be more careful. No more shooting practice during daylight. Keep the smoke down. No lights after dark." He glanced at her. "This is what the next week looks like, jumping at shadows, trusting nobody. You still willing?" "I told you, I want to see Coulter hang." She poured coffee with steady hands. "Besides, where would I go?" They spent the morning reinforcing their position. Eli showed Clara the cabin's defensive positions, the blind spots, where to ford up if shooting started. She absorbed it all with the same focused intensity she'd brought to marksmanship, asking smart questions about angles of fire and reload times. By afternoon, the promised snow had arrived, fat flakes that quickly obscured the trail. Eli welcomed it. Tracks would be harder to follow, and few men would brave a high-country storm without good reason. They brought the horses inside the lean-to attached to the cabin, securing them with extra grain and water. "Tell me about the war," Clara said as they watched the snow fall. Samuel never would. Said some things were better left buried. Eli considered her request. "Which part? The glory or the mud?" "The truth. Truth is both. I suppose. I was 16 when I joined up. Lied about my age. Thought I'd see adventure. Save the Union. Come home a hero." He laughed without humor. "Instead, I spent 3 years watching boys die for patches of ground nobody remembered the next day. Learned to track from an old Pawnee scout. Learned to shoot from a sergeant who'd fought in Mexico. Learned that glory's just a word people use when they weren't there." "Is that where you got those scars?" He'd forgotten she'd seen him changing his shirt that morning. The network of old wounds across his back. "Sharpshooter caught me at Chickamauga. Spent 2 months in a field hospital. Another 6 learning to walk again. War ended while I was still on crutches." "But you stayed in law work. Didn't know how to do much else by then. Tracking, shooting, reading men's intentions. Not many peaceful applications for those skills." He studied her profile in the gray light. "What about you? How'd a woman who wanted to be a nurse end up on a ranch in Colorado?" Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "After Thomas died, I had 2 choices. Sell to Coulter's people for pennies on the dollar, or find another husband who could work the land. Samuel was the only one who didn't look at me like damaged goods. He'd lost his first wife in childbirth. Understood what it meant to build on someone else's foundation." "You loved him?" She was quiet long enough that Eli thought she wouldn't answer. "I grew to, not the wild feeling I had with Thomas, all fire and promise. Samuel was steady, reliable. He'd hold me when the nightmares came, never asking for more than I could give. We were planning children come spring. He'd already started carving a cradle. The pain in her voice was fresh as a new wound. Eli fought the urge to reach for her, knowing comfort from him, a near stranger, might break the composure she held so carefully. "I'm with child," she said suddenly, the words hanging in the air between them like smoke. 2 months along, maybe 3. I haven't bled since late summer. Samuel didn't know yet. I was waiting to be sure. Eli's chest tightened. This changed things. A pregnant woman on the run, facing Coulter's guns and a hard trial ahead. "Clara, don't!" Her voice turned fierce. "Don't look at me like I'm fragile. This baby is all I have left of Samuel, of the life we were building. I'll see Coulter hang if I have to crawl to that courthouse. That's not... I was going to say you're the strongest woman I've met, but we'll need to adjust our plans. Make sure you have proper food. Medical care when the time comes." She turned to face him fully. "You're not sending me away. Wouldn't dream of it. Just means I'll worry more is all." The admission surprised him. When had she become someone he worried about beyond professional duty? That evening, as they shared their simple meal, the storm intensified. Wind howled through the canyon like a living thing, driving snow against the walls. The cabin creaked and groaned but held firm, a tiny island of warmth in the frozen world. Clara had found a piece of wood and Samuel's knife in her saddlebags, and sat carving by the fire. Eli watched her work, precise movements revealing unexpected skill. "What are you making?" "Not sure yet. Samuel taught me. Said it helped quiet the mind." She paused in her work. "That's how we marked time together, carving our names on things, leaving signs we existed. The oak where Papa died. That had our wedding date. The barn door had notches for each calf born, small monuments to a small life. Nothing small about building something with your own hands, raising cattle, making a marriage work. That's the biggest life there is out here." She smiled, the first full smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, revealing the woman she'd been before grief rewrote her features. "Samuel would have liked you. You see the world the same way. Honest. No prettying up the hard parts." They worked in companionable silence after that, Clara carving while Eli tended his weapons and gear. The storm raged outside, but inside felt almost peaceful, domestic, even. Though Eli pushed that thought away. He was here to protect a witness. Nothing more. The fact that her presence made the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like a home was just proximity. Nothing more. Near midnight, Clara jerked awake from another nightmare, Samuel's name on her lips. This time, Eli couldn't stop himself from going to her. He sat on the edge of her bunk, not touching but close enough she could feel his warmth. "Just a dream," he said quietly. "You're safe." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "I see him reaching for Papa every time I close my eyes, his fingers stretching out, trying so hard to save him even as the life bled out." Her voice broke. "What kind of man does that? Loves someone so much he'd use his last breath trying to save them? The kind worth remembering, worth carving monuments to, however small." She dropped her hands, looking up at him in the dim light. Without thinking, Eli brushed a tear from her cheek. The touch lasted only a moment, but something shifted between them, a recognition of possibility neither was ready to name. "Get some rest," he said, returning to his post. "Storm should break by morning." But he knew, watching her settle back into sleep, that something else had broken tonight. The careful distance he'd maintained, the professional boundaries that kept this simple. Clara Finch was no longer just a witness to protect. She was becoming something more dangerous, someone who mattered. Outside, wolves howled in the storm, their voices carrying ancient hungers through the night. Eli checked his rifle and settled in for the long watch, knowing that the threats inside this cabin might prove harder to guard against than any outside. The storm lasted 3 days, sealing them in a world of white silence and forced proximity. By the 4th morning, when weak sunlight finally broke through, the tension in the cabin had shifted into something neither could name. They moved around each other with careful awareness, hands brushing as they prepared meals, eyes meeting and holding a heartbeat too long. Clara stood at the window watching icicles drip from the eaves. "Like diamonds," she murmured. "Thomas used to say I'd have diamonds someday, when the ranch prospered. You were young when you married him." 17. Papa said I was too young, but Thomas was 25, established, offering a good life, and I thought I loved him with everything in me. She traced patterns in the fogged glass. Now I wonder if I just loved the idea of him, the escape, the adventure, someone who saw more in me than a farmer's daughter. Eli joined her at the window, careful to leave space between them. Nothing wrong with loving the promise of something better. Samuel was different. I went to him with eyes open, knowing exactly what I needed, a partner, not a savior. He gave me that and more. Quiet mornings, shared work, the kind of love that grows slow like good timber. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly. "This child will never know him. They'll know him through you, through the stories you tell." She turned to face him, and they were suddenly too close in the small space. "What stories will you tell? Eli, when this is over, what marks will you leave behind?" The question cut deeper than she could know. What legacy did a lawman leave? Dead outlaws and closed cases? The families he'd failed to save? Haven't thought much about after. He admitted. "Been living job to job since Mary died. Easier than making plans that might not matter." "That's no way to live," says the woman who just lost everything. Exactly. Her green eyes held his. "I know what it costs to have plans destroyed, but I also know what it means to have had them. Samuel and I carved our names in that oak because we believed in tomorrow. Even if tomorrow never came, the believing mattered." A drop of water fell from the roof, landing on Clara's cheek. Without thinking, Eli reached to wipe it away, his thumb lingering against her skin. She didn't pull back. Instead, she covered his hand with hers, holding it there. "Clara," his voice came out rough. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons why not. You're protecting me. I'm grieving. There's a baby. Coulter's still out there. I know." He should have stepped away, should have remembered his duty, his professional distance. Instead, he turned his hand to interlock their fingers. Her hands were small but strong, calloused from honest work, warm despite the morning chill. "When I was shot at Chickamauga," he said quietly, "I spent weeks out of my head with fever. The nurses said I called for Mary constantly, begging her to wait, not to leave without me. When I finally came around, I had to remember all over again that she was already gone. Had been for months." He squeezed Clara's hand gently. "I swore I'd never care that deep again, never give the world that power over me." "But you do care," Clara said. "Every time you check the window, every time you make sure I eat, every time you look at me like what? Like I'm not just a job anymore." The morning light caught in her hair, turning auburn to flame. Eli had seen beautiful women before, but none who wore their strength so clearly, who met the world's cruelty with such determined grace. He freed his hand carefully, stepping back before he did something that couldn't be undone. "You're not just a job," he admitted. "Haven't been since that first night when you asked if I thought you were still alive. But what you are is under my protection. That means something." Clara nodded slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Of course. You're an honorable man. Eli McCrae. It's written in every line of you." She moved to the stove, busying herself with coffee. "Tell me about after, when Coulter hangs and this is finished. Where will you go?" Grateful for the change of subject, Eli settled at the table. "Back to Mercy's Bend. I suppose. There's always work for a deputy who doesn't mind living rough. What about you?" "I've been thinking about that. Can't go back to the ranch. Too many ghosts. But I've got a little money saved. Enough maybe to start over somewhere. Denver, perhaps. They have a hospital there that trains nurses." She brought him coffee, her fingers steady. "Seems fitting, using Coulter's blood money to save lives instead of taking them. It's good to have plans, even if they don't survive." She sat across from him. "I had plans with Thomas, plans with Samuel. Look how those ended." But you're still making them. That's what matters. The believing, like you said. They spent the day in a careful dance of normalcy. Clara worked on her carving. He could see now it was taking the shape of a bird. Wings spread for flight. Eli cleaned and oiled his tack, wrote in his field journal, all the while intensely aware of her presence. When she hummed softly while working, he found himself matching his movements to her rhythm. That afternoon, she asked him to teach her to play cards. Samuel never would, said it wasn't seemly for women. Samuel sounds like he had some old-fashioned notions. He was a good man, Clara said firmly. Just careful with proprieties. It's one reason I waited to tell him about the baby. He'd have wrapped me in cotton wool, barely let me lift a finger. Eli found a worn deck in his saddlebags and taught her poker, using dried beans for stakes. She picked it up quickly, had a natural poker face, and soon was winning more hands than she lost. "You're cheating," he accused after she took her fifth pot. "Prove it," she challenged, eyes dancing with the first real joy he'd seen from her. "Can't. That's the problem with good cheaters." She laughed, the sound bright as spring water. "Maybe I missed my calling. Could have been a riverboat gambler instead of a rancher's wife. Never too late to change course." Her smile dimmed slightly. "Harder with a baby, but not impossible. Women have been starting over with children since the beginning of time." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the snow, Clara asked, "Will you write to me? After this is over, I'd like to know you're well." The request hit him unexpectedly hard. "You planning to disappear? Planning to survive? That might mean becoming someone else. Somewhere else. But I'd still like to know that Eli McCrae is out there, keeping the peace, believing in justice." "I'll write," he promised. "Care of general delivery in Denver?" That would work. She hesitated, then added, "I'm glad it was you they sent. Another deputy might have seen just a witness, a duty, a problem to solve. You see me as a person. You make it impossible not to." That night, neither of them slept well. The cabin felt too small, too full of unspoken possibilities. Eli stood his watch, hyper-aware of Clara's breathing, the way she shifted restlessly on her bunk. Near dawn, she rose and joined him at the window. "Can't sleep either," he asked. "Too much thinking." She stood close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd used, feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Do you ever wonder if the world puts people together at the wrong times? Like a cosmic jest? Every day since I met you." The admission hung between them like a held breath. Clara turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the pre-dawn dimness. "What would you do, Eli McCrae, if the world was different? If I wasn't a witness and you weren't a deputy? If Samuel hadn't just died and there wasn't a baby and Coulter wasn't out there plotting? What would you do?" He looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face in the pale light. "I'd court you proper, bring you flowers from the meadow, take you dancing at the harvest social. I'd carve our names in a tree somewhere and mean it. I'd build you a house with my own hands and fill it with laughter instead of sorrow." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "That's a beautiful dream. That's all it can be." "I know." She wiped her face with determined hands. "But thank you for saying it, for letting me imagine, just for a moment, that we met in a different story." The sun crested the ridge, painting the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold. A new day, bringing them closer to the trial, to the ending that would separate them. But for now, they stood together watching the light remake the world. Two souls who'd found each other at exactly the wrong time, holding fast to what honor would allow, and no more. The morning Eli left to scout the perimeter, Clara felt his absence like a missing limb. She busied herself with small tasks, mending a torn seam, organizing their dwindling supplies, anything to keep from watching the window. He'd promised to return by noon, but the sun climbed higher with no sign of him. When he finally appeared, favoring his left side with blood seeping through his coat, her heart seized. She rushed to help him inside, professional calm overtaking panic as her hands assessed the damage. "Bullet graze," he said through gritted teeth. Got careless. Sit. She pushed him into a chair, already reaching for the medical supplies. Where? Left shoulder. Caught me coming around Devil's Point. Just one shooter. Scared him off. Clara helped him out of his coat and shirt, breath catching at the angry furrow across his shoulder blade. The wound wasn't deep, but it bled freely. She worked with steady hands, cleaning and examining the injury with the competence of someone who'd doctored ranch injuries before. This needs stitching, she said. I can do it, but it'll hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting it. She found the needle and thread, sterilizing them in whiskey. Tell me about the shooter. Young kid, nervous, not one of Coulter's regulars. They don't miss. Eli hissed as she began stitching. Probably a scout. Paid to watch the trails. Means they're still looking. Clara concentrated on her work, making small, neat stitches. Being this close to him, touching his skin, threatened her composure. She could see other scars, the old wounds from Chickamauga he'd mentioned, newer ones from his years wearing a badge. His body told the story of a man who'd put himself between danger and others more times than anyone should. There, she said finally, tying off the thread. Try not to tear it open again. As she reached for bandages, Eli caught her wrist. Clara, thank you. It's nothing. You do the same. I mean for all of it. For not falling apart when I came in bleeding. For having steady hands. For being... Being what? More than I expected. More than I deserved to find out here. She should have pulled away. Instead, she let her fingers trail across an old scar near his ribs. What's this one from? Knife fight in Amarillo. Bank robber didn't want to come peaceful. His voice had gone rough. Clara, you shouldn't... I know. But she didn't stop her exploration, tracing the map of violence written on his skin. Do they hurt still? Only when it storms. Or when beautiful women ask about them. She laughed softly. I'm not beautiful. Not anymore. Too much wear, too much sorrow. Eli turned in the chair, catching her face between his hands. You're wrong. I've never seen anyone more beautiful than you are right now. With the sun in your hair and Samuel's blood under your fingernails and enough courage for 10 men burning in your eyes. The moment stretched between them, taut as a drawn bow. Then Clara leaned down and kissed him. It was nothing like the kisses she'd shared with Thomas in her girlhood, all eagerness and fumbling. Nothing like Samuel's careful affection. This was darker, hungrier, carrying the weight of all they couldn't have. Eli's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she could taste desperation and restraint warring on his lips. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. Clara stepped away, pressing fingers to her lips. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Eli's voice was raw. Just give me a minute. She busied herself putting away the medical supplies while he pulled his shirt back on. Wincing at the pull of stitches, the cabin felt too small again, charged with everything they weren't saying. We can't, Eli said finally. You know we can't. Because you're protecting me. Because you're grieving. Because you're carrying another man's child. Because in a week, you'll testify and I'll go back to Mercy's Bend and that'll be the end of it. He stood carefully, moving to the window. I won't be another sorrow in your life. Clara, you've had enough of those. What if I want more than protection? She moved behind him, not touching but close. What if I want whatever time we have, knowing it's limited? Isn't something better than nothing? Not always. Sometimes something makes the nothing harder to bear. That night, the moon rose full and bright, turning the snow-covered world into something from a dream. Clara lay wakeful, aware of Eli's every movement as he stood watch. The kiss haunted her, not with regret, but with want. She'd felt dead inside since finding Samuel's body, numb to everything but vengeance. Now she'd burned with inconvenient life, with desires that had no place in her situation. Near midnight, unable to stand the pretense of sleep, she rose and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Eli turned as she approached, his face unreadable in the silver light. Can't sleep? Too much moon. Samuel used to say I was moon-touched, the way it affected me. She joined him at the window. Made me restless, reckless even. You should rest. The baby. The baby's fine. It's the mother who's struggling. She gazed out at the ethereal landscape. Do you know what I thought when I kissed you? I thought, I'm alive. For the first time since that night. Truly alive. Is that wrong? No, but it's dangerous. Everything's dangerous out here. Living, loving, even breathing sometimes. She turned to face him. I buried my husband 9 days ago. In a few more days, I'll face his killer in court. After that, I'll disappear into a new life. Raise this child alone. Pretend the woman who loved Samuel Finch never existed. But tonight... Tonight what? Tonight I'm just Clara. And you're just Eli. And the moon is bright enough to see by. And we're both alive despite the odds. She let the blanket slip from her shoulders, standing before him in her thin nightdress. Tell me you don't want me. Eli's hands clenched at his sides. You know I can't tell you that. Then tell me to go back to bed. Tell me you're an honorable man who doesn't take advantage of grieving widows. Tell me anything that makes this easier. Instead, he reached for her, pulling her against him with desperate care. This doesn't end well, he warned against her hair. I know. You'll hate me after, or I'll hate myself. Maybe both. Maybe, or maybe we'll be grateful for one perfect night when the world made sense. She pulled back to meet his eyes. I've had careful love, proper love, slow-growing love, but I've never had this feeling like I'll die if you don't touch me. Is it wrong to want that? Just once? His answer was another kiss, deeper than the first, full of everything they'd been fighting. Clara melted into him, feeling the careful control he'd maintained crack and give way. His hands mapped her shoulders, her back, the curve of her waist, like he was memorizing her shape. When he lifted her and carried her to his bunk, she didn't protest. When he paused, giving her one last chance to reconsider, she pulled him down to her. In the moon-flooded darkness, they came together with desperate tenderness, each touch a confession, each kiss a promise they couldn't keep. Afterward, they lay entwined, watching moonlight travel across the rough wooden walls. Clara traced lazy patterns on Eli's chest, careful of his bandaged shoulder. No regrets? He asked quietly. None. You. Ask me in the morning. But she heard the sadness in his voice, knew he was already pulling away even as he held her close. This was stolen time, borrowed against a future that didn't include them together. But for now, for these few hours before dawn, they could pretend otherwise. Tell me something true, she whispered. Something you've never told anyone. Eli was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the day Mary died, we'd argued. She wanted to come to town with me, said she was tired of being cooped up at the ranch. I told her it was too dangerous, that Coulter's boys had been seen in the area. She laughed, said I worried too much. His arm tightened around her. Last thing I said was that she was being foolish. Didn't tell her I loved her, didn't kiss her goodbye. Just rode off mad. When I came back, the cabin was burning and I never got to take it back. Clara lifted herself on an elbow, seeing the old pain etched in his features. She knew you loved her. Sisters always know. Maybe, but I'll never be sure. He touched her face gently. That's why I'm telling you now. While I can. Whatever happens, Clara Finch, know that you brought light back into my world when I thought it was gone for good. Know that you're carved into me as deep as any scar. She kissed him softly, tasting salt. And you saved me, Eli McCrae, not just from Coulter, but from disappearing into grief. You made me remember I'm more than Samuel's widow or this baby's mother. I'm still Clara, and she's worth saving. They made love again as the moon set, slower this time, saying with touch what words couldn't convey. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept curved together like question marks, stealing warmth and comfort while the night allowed it. But morning always comes, and with it, the return of duty and distance. They both knew this night was parentheses in their story, not a new chapter. Still, as Clara felt sleep pulling her under, Eli's heart beat steady beneath her palm. She was grateful for the moon's gift. Some things were worth the inevitable sorrow. Dawn came harsh and bright, finding them on opposite sides of the cabin again. Eli had risen before first light, dressing silently and taking up his post at the window. Clara woke to find his bunk empty, the sheets cold, as if the night had been a dream. Only the lingering ache in her body and the careful distance in his eyes proved otherwise. They moved through the morning routine without speaking, each hyper-aware of the other. When their hands accidentally touched over the coffee pot, both pulled back as if burned. The easy companionship of recent days had shattered, replaced by something fragile and painful. By noon, Eli couldn't stand the silence. "Clara, about last night." "Don't." She kept her back to him, scrubbing an already clean plate. "Please don't turn it into a mistake that needs apologizing for." "That's not what I was going to say." She turned then, and he saw the tears she'd been fighting. "Then what? That it can't happen again, that you've compromised your duty, that I've dishonored Samuel's memory before he's even cold in the ground?" "I was going to say that I don't regret it, but you're right, it can't happen again." He moved closer, wanting to comfort but not daring to touch. "This thing between us, it's real, too real, and that makes it dangerous." "For who? You or me?" "Both. I can't protect you properly if I'm distracted, and you need protection more than you need whatever this is." Clara laughed bitterly. "Whatever this is, yes, let's diminish it, make it small and manageable." She dried her hands with sharp movements. "You're right, of course. The practical Deputy McCrae, always seeing the bigger picture. That's not fair." "Fair?" Her voice rose. "Was it fair when Coulter murdered my family? When I found myself with child and no husband? When the one good thing to come from this nightmare has to be wrapped up and put away because of duty and timing?" She pressed her hands to her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm not handling this well." Eli crossed to her then, gathering her against him despite his resolutions. She resisted for a moment before collapsing into his chest, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Not of Coulter or the trial. I'm scared of feeling empty again when you're gone. Last night, I felt whole for the first time since, and now I have to go back to being half a person, and I don't know if I can." He held her tighter, his own throat tight. "You're the strongest person I know. You'll survive this like you've survived everything else. Surviving isn't living. Eli, you of all people should know that." He did know. Had spent 6 years merely surviving since Mary's death, going through the motions of life without truly living it, until a green-eyed widow with impossible courage had reminded him what it felt like to want tomorrow to come. A rider approaching broke them apart. Eli moved to the window, hand on his Colt. The horseman came openly, hands visible, a badge glinting on his chest. "Marshal from Fort Collins," Eli said, relaxing slightly, probably bringing word about the trial. The marshal, a weathered man named Tom Garrett, brought news that changed everything. "Trial's been moved up," he announced, accepting coffee from Clara. "Judge is coming through day after tomorrow. Wants to clear the docket before winter sets in proper." "Day after tomorrow?" Clara's face paled. "But I thought we had a week." Coulter's lawyer pushed for it, probably hoping to catch the prosecution unprepared. Garrett studied Clara with professional assessment. "You ready to testify, ma'am?" "Yes." Her chin lifted. "I've been ready since the night it happened." "Good. We'll ride out first thing tomorrow, get you to town early. Marshal McCrae, you'll provide escort?" "Of course." After Garrett left, promising to return at dawn, the cabin felt smaller than ever. One more day, one more night before Clara faced her husband's killer and their paths diverged forever. "I need air," Clara said abruptly, grabbing her shawl. Eli followed her outside. where the afternoon sun had turned the snow to glittering diamonds. She walked to the edge of the cleared area, wrapping her arms around herself. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "To see Coulter again? To relive that night in front of strangers?" She shook her head. "I'll never be ready, but I'll do it anyway." She turned to him, eyes fierce. "I want him to see me, want him to know that his bullets didn't kill everyone that night, that someone survived to speak the truth." "He'll hang. Clara, I promise you that." "And then what? You go back to Mercy's Bend. I disappear to Denver or somewhere else. We become people who knew each other once, during the worst week of my life." Her voice broke. "How is that fair?" "It's not." Eli moved closer, unable to maintain distance when she was hurting. "But it's what is. We both knew this was temporary. Knowing and accepting are different things." She looked up at him. "Will you remember me? 10 years from now. Will you remember the woman who stayed in this cabin?" "Every day." The words came out raw. "Every damn day for the rest of my life." She reached up, touching his face gently. "That helps, knowing I'll live somewhere besides my own memory." That evening, they packed in heavy silence. Clara folded her few belongings carefully, tucking the wooden bird she'd carved into her bag. She'd finished it that morning, a hawk with spread wings, ready for flight. "It's beautiful," Eli said, seeing her wrap it carefully. "It's for the baby. Something from this time that isn't colored by sorrow." She managed a smile. "Well, not only by sorrow." They prepared their last meal together, moving around each other with the practiced ease of a long married couple. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. When darkness fell, neither suggested sleep. Instead, they sat by the fire, shoulders touching, watching flames dance. "Tell me about Denver," Eli said. "What you'll do there." Clara leaned into his warmth. "Find a boarding house that takes women with children. Apply to the hospital's training program. Learn to save lives instead of watching them end." She paused. "Maybe one day I'll forget the color of Coulter's eyes when he lit that cigar. Maybe I'll stop seeing Samuel in every man who walks with a limp. The remembering gets easier. Not the forgetting, but the remembering. One day it stops cutting and starts honoring, I suppose." Mary's been gone 6 years, and now when I think of her, it's her laugh I remember first, not the burned cabin. "I hope you're right." She turned to look at him. "What about you? Back to Mercy's Bend and the next job?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's time for something different. This badge has been my whole life since the war. Might be time to see what else is out there." "You could come to Denver." The words hung between them, dangerous as loaded guns. Eli's jaw tightened. "You know I can't. Not right away. Maybe not ever. You need to build your new life without the shadow of this hanging over it. This, you keep calling it this." Clara pulled away, standing abruptly. "It has a name. Eli. Several names. Love being one of them." He stood too, catching her arm. "Don't you think I know that? Don't you think it's killing me to let you go?" His control finally cracked. "I love you. Clara Finch. Love you enough to know you deserve better than a worn-out deputy who brings nothing but danger and old ghosts. And I love you. Eli McCrae. Enough to know that's horse shit." She faced him squarely. "But I also know you won't change your mind. Your honor won't let you. So I'll go to Denver and you'll go to Mercy's Bend and we'll both pretend this was just circumstance instead of the only real thing either of us has felt in years." They stood frozen, the truth finally spoken between them. Then Clara stepped forward, pressing something into his hand. Her wooden carving, the hawk she'd made for the baby. "Keep it," she said. "So you remember that even caged birds dream of flying." He pulled her close, kissing her with all the desperation of a condemned man. She responded with equal fervor, pouring everything they couldn't have into this moment they could steal. When they broke apart, both were crying. "I'll write," he promised against her hair. "Whatever happens, I'll write." "Liar," she whispered. "But I love you for saying it." They held each other through the night, not making love but memorizing, the sound of shared breathing, the feeling of fitting perfectly together, the warmth that would have to last through all the cold nights ahead. Neither slept, unwilling to waste these last hours on something as ordinary as dreams. When dawn came, bringing Marshall Garrett and the end of their stolen time, they were ready. As ready as two people could be to walk away from the only thing that made sense in a world gone mad with loss. Clara mounted her horse with dry eyes and steady hands, every inch the witness ready to seek justice. But Eli saw her fingers brush the pocket where she'd kept the carved hawk, saw the moment of grief that crossed her face. He touched his own pocket, feeling the wooden bird she'd given him, and made a silent promise. Someday, somehow, when honor and duty and proper mourning time had passed, he'd find her again. Even if it took years, even if she'd moved on, he'd find her and return the hawk to its rightful owner. The trail down from the cabin had never seemed so short. The attack came at Widow's Creek, where the trail narrowed between granite walls. Eli heard the rifle crack a heartbeat before the bullet sparked off the rocks beside him. He shoved Clara low on her horse, returning fire as he spurred toward cover. "Ride!" he shouted. But Clara was already moving, bent low over her mare's neck as bullets whined overhead. Marshall Garrett cursed steadily, firing from behind a boulder. 3 shooters, maybe 4, positioned on the ridgeline with clear command of the trail. Eli's Winchester barked repeatedly as he laid down covering fire. "Get her out of here," he yelled to Garrett. "Not leaving you." Clara started. "Go!" The command came out harsh. "That's an order." Garrett grabbed Clara's reins, spurring both horses down the trail. Eli watched them disappear around the bend before turning back to the fight. Blood seeped through his shirt where a bullet had reopened yesterday's wound. But adrenaline kept the pain distant. A figure moved between the rocks above, sloppy cover that cost him. Eli's shot took the man's center mass, sending him tumbling down the cliff face. 2 more shooters remained, their fire intensifying. Then Clara was there again, on foot, the Colt he'd taught her to use steady in her hands. "I said I wouldn't leave you," she said calmly, and shot one of the ambushers before he could realize the threat from below. The man screamed, clutching his shoulder as his rifle clattered away. The last shooter broke cover, trying to flee. Eli's bullet caught him in the leg, dropping him hard. In the sudden silence, gun smoke drifted like morning fog. "You disobeyed a direct order," Eli said, trying for stern but failing. "I'm not one of your deputies." Clara lowered the Colt with shaking hands. "Besides, you taught me to shoot. Seemed wasteful not to use it." Garrett appeared, leading the horses back. "Ma'am, that was the damnedest thing I've seen in 20 years wearing a badge." He surveyed the scene grimly. "Coulter's boys. From the look of them, he's getting desperate." They secured the wounded ambushers, who confirmed Garrett's assessment. Coulter had put a bounty on Clara, $500 to anyone who kept her from testifying. Every hard case in the territory would be hunting them now. "We need to move," Eli said, pressing a bandana to his bleeding shoulder. "There'll be more coming." Clara moved to check his wound, her touch professionally gentle. "This needs tending. Later, when you're safe." Her green eyes flashed. "Stop being noble and let me help." He submitted to her ministrations, watching her work with the same steady competence she'd shown in the fight. When had this grieving widow become someone who could face gunfire without flinching? Perhaps she always had been, and circumstances had simply revealed it. They rode hard the rest of the day, taking back trails and doubling back twice to confuse pursuit. By evening, Mercy's Bend appeared below them, lamp-lit windows promising civilization and safety. The courthouse stood at the center of town, solid brick and timber, where justice would be served come morning. Sheriff Daniels met them at the jail, his weathered face grim. "Glad you made it. Town's crawling with Coulter's sympathizers. We've got men on every corner, but watch yourself." Clara was installed in the hotel's best room, with deputies posted outside. Eli wanted to stay, but Daniels pulled him aside. "You're too close to this. Eli, let my boys handle security tonight." "Jim?" "That's an order. You look dead on your feet, and that shoulder's still bleeding. Get some rest." You'll be no good to her tomorrow if you collapse in court. Reluctantly, Eli agreed. He stopped by Clara's room before leaving, finding her at the window overlooking the street. She'd changed into a clean dress, dark blue that made her eyes seem deeper. Tomorrow's widow weeds, appropriate for facing her husband's killer. You should rest, he said from the doorway. She turned, attempting a smile. So should you. That shoulder will keep. He entered the room, closing the door behind him. Clara, tomorrow. Tomorrow I speak for Samuel and Papa. Tomorrow I make sure Coulter hangs. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled. Tomorrow it ends. And after? After, I become someone else. The widow heading to Denver, starting over. She moved closer. Unless, don't. The word came out rougher than intended. We agreed. We agreed to a lot of things. Then I shot a man to save your life, and you bled for me again. And I'm tired of pretending this is just duty for either of us. She touched his face gently. Stay tonight. Please, I don't want to face tomorrow alone. Every reason to refuse crowded his mind. Propriety, duty, the deputies outside, her reputation. But looking at her, brave and frightened and beautiful in her sorrow, he couldn't voice any of them. Let me wash up first, he said quietly. And tell the deputies I'm posting inside tonight, for security. Her smile was radiant through tears. For security? Of course. An hour later, cleaned and bandaged and having arranged things with the guards, Eli returned to find Clara in her nightdress, brushing her hair by lamplight. The domestic intimacy of it struck him hard, this glimpse of what might have been in another life. Second thoughts, she asked, seeing his hesitation. Never. He crossed to her, taking the brush from her hands. Let me. He'd never brushed a woman's hair before, but something about the act felt sacred. Each stroke through the auburn length was a meditation, a memorization. Clara's eyes closed, tension leaving her shoulders. I killed a man today, she said quietly. Shot him without thinking, just like you taught me. What does that make me? Alive. Eli answered. It makes you alive. Samuel would be horrified. He believed in the sanctity of life, turning the other cheek. She opened her eyes, meeting his in the mirror. But I'm glad I did it. Glad I could protect you like you've protected me. Does that make me terrible? It makes you human. He set the brush aside, hands resting on her shoulders. The world's a hard place. Clara, sometimes staying good means doing hard things. Samuel would understand that. She rose, turning into his arms. I have something to tell you. Something that changes things. His heart clenched. What? I'm not carrying Samuel's child. The words came in a rush. I started bleeding yesterday. The stress, maybe, or the riding, or God's own timing. But there's no baby. Eli, no last piece of Samuel to honor. He pulled her close, feeling her tremble. I'm sorry, I know you wanted... I wanted Samuel to live on somehow. But maybe this is freedom. Permission to start over without dragging the past forward. She pulled back to see his face. Does this change anything between us? Everything. Nothing. He cupped her face gently. I still can't offer you anything beyond tonight. Tomorrow you testify, and then you disappear into a new life. That hasn't changed. But tonight? Tonight you're not pregnant with another man's child. Tonight you're just Clara and I'm just Eli, and tomorrow is a lifetime away. She kissed him then, different from their desperate encounters at the cabin. This was deliberate, chosen, carrying the weight of all they'd survived to reach this moment. When she led him to the bed, he followed willingly. Honor be damned. They made love with aching tenderness. Every touch a goodbye neither wanted to voice. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the sounds of the town beyond the window, dogs barking, a piano from the saloon. Life continuing, unaware of the small tragedy playing out in this room. I would have raised the baby, Eli said into the darkness. If you'd have had me, would have claimed it as mine, given it my name. Clara's breath hitched. Don't, please don't make this harder. I need you to know, need you to understand that this isn't about freedom or convenience, baby or no baby. I'd choose you if choosing was mine to do." She turned in his arms, tears silvering her cheeks. "Then choose, Eli. Choose me. Come to Denver. Or let me stay here. Or run away to California where nobody knows us. Just choose us over duty for once." The plea tore at him, but his answer remained the same. "You deserve better than a life built on running. Better than a man who let you down when it mattered most. When did you let me down? When I let this happen. When I couldn't keep professional distance. When I made you love me knowing I couldn't follow through." His voice broke. "I'm supposed to protect you, Clara, even from myself." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're a fool. Eli McCrae, an honorable, stubborn fool, but you're my fool, at least for tonight." They held each other through the remaining hours, memorizing the feeling of completeness that would have to sustain them through whatever came next. When dawn approached, they dressed in silence, armoring themselves for the day's ordeal. At the door, Clara stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, know this, you saved me. Not just from Coulter, but from disappearing into grief. You reminded me I'm worth saving, worth loving. That's the gift I'll carry forward, even if I can't carry you." He kissed her one last time, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. Then he opened the door, stepping back into his role as her protector, her deputy. Nothing more. The guards nodded respectfully, unaware that Deputy McCrae had just left his heart in that room, ready to face justice with an empty chest and steady hands. The courtroom was packed to the rafters when they brought Jack Coulter in. He walked with the same arrogant swagger that had terrorized the territory for years, silver concho belt catching the light. His cold eyes swept the crowd before landing on Clara, and his lips curved in a smile that made Eli's hand itch for his gun. Clara sat straight-backed in the witness chair, hands folded in her lap. She wore the dark blue dress from the night before, her hair pinned severely back. To anyone watching, she appeared calm, composed. Only Eli could see the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she pressed them together to still the shaking. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Clara Finch." Her voice carried clear and strong through the courtroom, as she recounted that terrible night. Eli watched Coulter's expression shift from amusement to annoyance to something darker. The man hadn't expected her to be so articulate, so precise in her testimony. Every detail damned him further: the demands for water rights, the torture of Samuel, the burial of her father. "And you're certain the man who led these actions was the defendant?" the prosecutor asked. Clara looked directly at Coulter. "I'll never forget his face. He lit a cigar while my father died, smiled while giving orders to burn everything we'd built. That man sitting there killed my family for water and land, and I watched him do it." Coulter's lawyer tried to shake her story, suggesting she'd been hysterical, that darkness had obscured faces, that grief had clouded memory. Clara met each challenge with quiet certainty, never wavering, never backing down. When the lawyer suggested she might have reasons to lie, she lifted her chin. "What reason could be worth this? Worth reliving the worst night of my life in front of strangers? Worth making myself a target for his men?" Her voice rose slightly. "I gain nothing from this but the knowledge that justice might still exist in this territory. That men like Jack Coulter can't simply take what they want and leave the rest of us to bury our dead." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even hardened ranchers who'd stayed neutral in the land disputes looked troubled. Clara Finch had put a human face on Coulter's reign of terror. When she stepped down, Eli escorted her back to her seat. As she passed Coulter, the outlaw spoke low enough only they could hear. "You'll regret this, widow. Both of you." Eli's hand went to his gun, but Clara touched his arm lightly. "He's nothing," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "Just another bully who mistakes fear for respect." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned with a guilty verdict, the courtroom erupted. Coulter's men started forward but found themselves facing a wall of armed deputies and citizens. The judge's gavel cracked repeatedly. Jack Coulter, the judge intoned when order was restored. You have been found guilty of murder in the first degree. You will be taken from this place and hanged by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none. Coulter's composure finally cracked. As they dragged him out, he screamed threats at Clara, at Eli, at everyone who'd testified. His words echoed off the walls until the jail door slammed shut. Outside, Clara stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply of the crisp morning air. Citizens approached to shake her hand, to thank her for her courage. She accepted their gratitude graciously, but Eli could see the cost in the tightness around her eyes. It's done, she said when they finally had a moment alone. Samuel and Papa can rest now. You did good in there, brave as any soldier I've served with. She managed a small smile. I had a good teacher in many things. Sheriff Daniels approached, tipping his hat to Clara. Ma'am, there's a federal marshal here. Says he's to escort you to wherever you're planning to settle. Government wants to ensure your safety until Coulter's organization falls apart. Clara nodded. I'm ready. Just give me a moment. Daniels withdrew, understanding. Clara turned to Eli, and for a moment, the careful distance between them collapsed. She was just a woman and he was just a man, and they were saying goodbye. I suppose this is it, she said. I suppose it is. You could still come with me. The offer stands. Eli touched her face gently, memorizing the feel of her skin one last time. And have you wonder every day if I came out of duty or love? Have you built a new life on uncertainty? No, Clara, you deserve a clean start. I'll never have that. Part of me will always be on that mountain with you. She covered his hand with hers. But I understand. You're trying to save me one last time, even if it's from yourself. Write to me, he said roughly. When you're settled, just so I know you're safe. Liar, she whispered, echoing her words from their last night at the cabin. But I love you for saying it. The federal marshal appeared, a professional-looking man who introduced himself as Robert Harper. He had a kind face and treated Clara with respectful courtesy that eased Eli's mind slightly. This man would see her safe to Denver, would ensure she had what she needed to start over. As Clara climbed into the waiting coach, she looked back one last time. Eli, that first morning, when you found me at the ranch, I was ready to die, had Samuel's pistol in my hands, planning to follow him and Papa. Then you showed up, all duty and determination, and made me mad enough to want to prove you wrong, to prove I could survive. Her eyes glistened. Thank you for that anger. It saved my life. Before he could respond, she was inside the coach, and Harper was climbing up to the driver's seat. The team lurched into motion, carrying Clara Finch out of his life with the finality of a judge's gavel. Eli stood on the dusty street long after the coach disappeared, his hand touching the pocket where her carved hawk rested. Around him, Mercy's Bend returned to its daily rhythm, shopkeepers sweeping storefronts, cowboys heading for the saloon, life moving forward as it always did. You all right? Daniels asked, appearing at his elbow. Fine, Eli lied. Just tired. Hell of a week. Hell of a woman, too. Don't see many with that kind of steel. Daniels studied him shrewdly. She's the kind worth following, if a man was inclined. Maybe, but I'm not that man. No, Daniels agreed sadly. You're too much like me, wedded to the badge and too stubborn to see past it. Well, there's always work for men like us. Got a telegram about rustlers up near Crystal Creek. Interested? Eli touched the carved hawk again, then nodded. Give me an hour to resupply, then I'll ride. But first, he had a letter to write. Sitting at his desk in the sheriff's office, he pulled out paper and pen, then stopped. What could he say that wouldn't sound hollow, that wouldn't reopen wounds better left to heal? In the end, he wrote simply, Clara, by the time you read this, you'll be in Denver, starting the life you deserve. I want you to know that the man who found you that morning is gone. You changed him, carved him into something better, something more. The hawk you made rests in my pocket where my badge used to be most important. Now they share space, duty and beauty side by side. Don't write back. Don't tell me where you settle. Let me imagine you happy, healing, helping others heal in turn. Let that be enough. Know that somewhere in this wide territory, a worn-out deputy carries you with him always. That has to be enough for both of us. He sealed the letter, addressed it to General Delivery, Denver, and gave it to the next mail coach. Then he saddled his horse and rode out to track rustlers, leaving the town and his heart behind. Years later, when people asked about the carved hawk he kept on his desk, Eli would say only that it was a reminder. They assumed he meant a reminder of a case, of justice served. They were wrong. It was a reminder that even in the darkest canyon, even in the depths of winter, spring could find a way to bloom, that broken people could help each other become whole, even if they couldn't stay together. It was a reminder that he had been loved by Clara Finch, and that was more than most men got in a lifetime. In Denver, a woman with green eyes would touch the scar on her palm where she'd gripped a gun to save the man she loved. She'd tell her daughter, born 9 months later with her father's stubborn chin and her mother's fierce heart, about the deputy who'd taught her to shoot, to survive, to love again. The daughter would grow up strong and fearless, carrying a name that honored the past while facing forward, Mary Clara Finch, after 2 women who'd shaped her mother's heart. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and silver bright, both Eli and Clara would remember a cabin in the mountains where the world had made sense, if only for a heartbeat, where love had bloomed in winter ground, too early and too late, perfect in its imperfection. That memory, like the carved hawk, would have to be enough. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love and loss rode side by side across the untamed frontier. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment below and let us know, whether you're by a real campfire or just dreaming of those wide-open spaces. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of the American frontier, and share your thoughts about Clara and Eli's journey. Did they make the right choice? Should honor always come before love? We'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning and your hearts open to the stories the wind carries.